Quick disclaimer, this is not the traditional or proper way to make a Shinai. This is simply the way I made one. Now, onto the video. Shinai originated in Japan in about 1711 to 1715 when Fukuru Shinai were developed by Naganuma Shozaemon Kunisato. Please excuse my pronunciation. These Shinai were very similar to modern Shinai, however, they were covered with a sort of bag which held it all together. These Shinai have been largely superseded by other types of Shinai, although they are still used by certain schools of kendo.
Now, the reason that Shinai were developed in the first place was the risk of injury from being hit with a bokken or other training implements used at the time. These were solid pieces of wood and or metal, so they would hurt a lot when you got hit by one. As Shinai have pieces which move around and take the impact, you greatly decrease the chance of injury or even death, which sometimes did occur with bokken and other such implements. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do is to collect your materials and your equipment. For this build, you will need a large piece of bamboo, a saw, a plane, sandpaper, a piece of soft metal, tin snips, a small piece of wood or a wide dowel, some suede or other tough material, and a needle and thread, or a sewing machine if you have one. Also, electrical tape is very useful at certain points. Now, safety measures. Firstly, just use common sense and do everything slowly and carefully. A lot of injuries come from people not thinking and messing up. In regards to power tools, if you're using any, keep your hands and your fingers away from any moving parts, and if you do need to push something close to a moving part, then please use gloves, a piece of scrap wood, or even better, both. Finally, bamboo can throw off some nasty splinters, so you really should sand down any pieces that are rough or have just been worked on. If you really want to be safe, then wear gloves. Now that's out of the way, onto the build. Okay, so first you're going to want a large piece of bamboo with its walls not too thick. The dimensions of my piece were 2 meters, 10 centimeters, and 1 centimeter as a length, diameter, and wall thickness respectively. After you have gotten this, you're going to want to cut it in half. To do this, I'd recommend a bandsaw. Next, you're going to want to cut the end of your desired length, which for me was 117 centimeters. However, I left an additional 3 centimeters on so that it would give me a greater margin of error. Next, you will want to cut it in half again so as to give you quarters of the original piece. Finally, you're going to want to cut those quarters in half. These pieces should be around 3 centimeters wide. The next step is to plane the pieces. Before you draw and cut out the pieces, I suggest that you plane the bottom of them so that they are relatively flat. A good test is that if they lie on the table without rocking from side to side. This should make it easier to draw on and cut, if you're using a bandsaw that is, and you have to do it later anyway, so it saves some time then. You can try to make it completely flat by heating up the bamboo and pressing it, which is supposed to work, however, not really necessary, and when I tried it, I just ended up barbecuing the test piece of bamboo. After this, you'll need to draw the outline of the Shinai pieces. The way I did it was to find the width of the tip, the widest part, and the end of the handle on an actual Shinai, which was 1.3, 2.6, and 2 centimeters respectively. I then marked these out at 0, 40, and 117 centimeters respectively on the piece of wood that I had. After using a little math to keep them centered, I then connected the dots with the lines to form the outline of the Shinai part. You could alternatively make a single paper stencil and use that, which I actually recommend because the way I did it was difficult to say the least. You then finally need to cut out the actual shape of the Shinai pieces. Make sure they cut outside the line, and it is easier to fix if you have much more material than if you don't have enough. Now that you have the general shape of the pieces, you need to curve the edges so that they aren't square and can slide past each other. I found that the best way to do this was with a rasp and a clamp. After you've gotten the rough shape, you can move to smoothing it out with sandpaper until you have pieces which won't throw off splinters when they rub against each other whenever you hit someone. To make the Shinai not collapse in on itself, there needs to be 2 supports, one at the tip, one at the base. For the bottom support, I used a piece of soft metal. To work out how wide it needs to be, you need to measure the width of the widest Shinai piece that you have at about 8 centimeters from the bottom. Then you need to draw a square of this dimension. Say it's 2 centimeters, you draw a 2 by 2 centimeter square. You then cut out the square with some tin snips. It's best to give a bit of extra material on the side so you can adjust it later. Next, cut a shallow groove into each of the pieces about 8 cm above the bottom of the handle. These grooves should only be about a few millimeters deep and as wide as the thickness of your piece of metal. You now want to start working on the handle. It needs to be about 33 cm long and with a varying width depending on how you've made your shinai. The way that I did it was to take a measurement of the diameter of the shinai every 3 cm or so, starting at the end and ending at 33 cm, and then use these measurements to draw out a stencil on some burlap. Cut this out while leaving some extra material all around to act as a seam, pin it together and sew it on the line. You want as tight a fit as possible, so go as close to the line as possible. For this step, I actually couldn't get the right material anywhere. I looked everywhere. Shops, online, you name it, but in the end I had to use burlap. If you can get the material, please use white suede. The process to make the tip is very similar, but you only need to make 2 measurements of the diameter. One at the very tip, and one about 5.5 cm from the end. Again, you need to cut it out and sew it up, in a similar manner to the previous one. When putting the handles on, first turn them inside out so that all seams are on the inside. Then, just work them onto the handle and the tip.
Finally, you want to sew 2 loops to the handle, which you can then use to tie the take. This secures the whole shinai together. To do this, I'd recommend searching it up on YouTube, as I am no expert on how to do it.